Hello and welcome everyone. This is Mike Dolph at Inflow. We're glad to have you on this webinar and training today. Today we're going to be covering part one of the Mitel administrator training, and we're going to have Tom Lyons, one of our subject matter experts, leading us off on this. Tom, why don't you say hello and introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, like Mike said, my name is Tom Lyons. I'm a subject matter expert and senior engineer over at Inflow Communications. Been here for over 5 years now and have a wealth of experience both on the PBX and contact center sides.
Awesome, thanks Tom. And so Mike Dolph, my role is Chief Revenue Officer, been working at Inflow over 4 years and in the UC and contact center space for over 10. So just a quick kind of plug for some additional webinars. Obviously you're on part one of a webinar for training on Mitel Connect Administrator. So part two is tomorrow. So obviously most folks are going to be joining that. So look forward to having you on tomorrow as well. We've got one coming up on the 3rd, talking about the rise of RingCentral and UCaaS. Register for that. Or on the 4th, we're talking about using AI as part of your omni-channel strategy. So that one more contact center focused. All right. But I'm on to really just give a quick introduction to Inflow Communications. We get a lot of customers who have worked with us for many years and other folks who haven't or don't work with us currently. So just to give a quick intro to us, I think it's helpful for you guys to understand as you go through the training, what's our knowledge, where do we come from, how do we approach this. So as a company, we just focus on UC and contact center solutions. That's all we do. So everything we do falls within those two closely related spectrums. We work with obviously ShoreTel Mitel. We're a platinum partner, have several hundred customers on that system that we work with day in and day out and do projects and everything else. We also work with a couple other really key partners, RingCentral, Genesys, PeerCloud, to name a few. We're spread across the country. Most of our customers are headquartered in the US, but we have customers in almost every state at this point. We have employees spread out across the US as well. From a sample size perspective, a lot of this information Tom shares with you, right, is based off of working with hundreds of customers, tens of thousands of endpoints of different types of companies, different verticals, and different uses of how they're leveraging their telephony and UC. So we like to boil that down and share that information and help empower customers to be able to work better on their system, better leverage it, obviously in this case, be better administrators of the system. So, and as a company, we've grown and done well because we've been really focused on the customer experience, both from a support perspective, a project perspective, providing education and information perspective, just like we're doing today. That's what we feel like customers want and need and deserve. So in that vein, we want to empower customers and teach you guys about how to administer your system better. So go ahead and turn to the next one. This is just a couple of the customers we work with across the country, some familiar names here. And obviously, if we don't work with you today, this is glad to meet you virtually on this webinar and hope we have an opportunity to have a conversation with you in the future. So with that, Tom, I'll turn it over to you. And one quick housekeeping thing is, as Tom goes through the training, feel free to hit the question bar and ask questions there, and Tom will be pausing throughout the training to answer questions. Obviously, I think a lot of the benefit of this is when it's what's going on in your world and taking it down to what you're working with specifically in your environment. Tom's an expert in this, so tap into his knowledge, right, of specific scenarios or questions you've got, and he'll try to get to those as he goes through the prezo. So Tom, I'll turn it over to you, man.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mike. So once again, my name is Tom Lyons, Senior Engineer over here at Inflow Communications. Today, we're going over part one of our two-part Connect Administrator training. Today, we are going to be focusing mainly on users and user groups. And if we have some extra time, I'm going to go over some of the diagnostic functions as well. Tomorrow, we will be covering a lot more of the group-specific features and advanced features of the system, such as hunt groups, work groups, paging groups, and you name it. So I'm going to go through these step by step, go through each field, make sure we have a general understanding of what we're looking at. At the end of each section, I will stop and ask for questions, which is what Mike was alluding to with the question box. You can type your questions in there, and we will answer any that we see as we hit each segment here. And then at the end, we will stop for a general Q&A for about 10 minutes as well. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it here. On my screen, as you can see, I am on the dashboard page of the Connect Director. Many of you have probably seen this before. This is what diagnostics and monitoring used to be. With 14.2, they've actually rolled it right into a maintenance page in the Connect director. So all of those options are there. And we will go over that tomorrow towards the end of the training. But for what we're going to do today, we're going to go over users and user groups and give you a good understanding of what you're looking at there and how to handle their permissions and the users in the system. So as you can see, there are a number of icons up on the top left of the Connect director, kind of in that first pane. If you have used director 14.2, you're probably familiar with the tan pane on the side that lets you control where you want to go in the system. Connect director is very much the same, except there are a number of icons that actually let you specify exactly what you're looking for. So it's a little bit easier to find certain things. So for what we're going to be looking at today, we're going to use the wrench, which is administration. And you'll see under administration, you're going to see a number of things that are going to look really familiar to you if you've done anything in a short tail environment on the director side, whether you've been in 14 or Connect before. Today, we're going to go over users. So I'm going to click on the users tab. You can see there's a number of subtopics, and the one that we're going to look at specifically is the users tab here. So I'm going to go ahead and open this one up here. And this is one of the first pieces where you're going to see a significant difference between how Connect handles things in 14. You'll notice that instead of having one big tab with just users on it that you'd have to click into using hyperlinks like you did in 14, we actually have two panes very similar to diagnostics and monitoring. The top pane is going to have all of your users, and the bottom pane is going to have the information for those users. In addition, there's going to be a series of checkboxes next to users, which was not here before. This is useful for bulk modification options, such as deleting or bulk editing users. If you're familiar with the batch update utility in 14.2, that's actually where the batch utility has moved. Instead of having its own link and drop downs that you would have to modify in order to change users, you can actually just select the users that you want to change, just as I've done here. And then you have the ability to bulk edit up here. And we'll get into that at the end of the users here, but just to show you that function here. And you can also, if you see this magnifying glass, you can search for specific users rather than having to use the built-in search feature in the web browser. So it makes it much easier. So if I was looking just for Thomas, and I type that in the first name, it's going to just do a full match for the name Thomas, and you can see we have one user in there. So it's nice and easy to find things compared to how it was before. Down at the bottom is really what we're going to be looking at today, though. So to go through the options, when you're looking to modify or create a new user, when you're on the users pane, you have the option of just going into the user or creating a new one. All of your new, as well as the ability to copy, delete, and even export users to a file are up at the top here. And then down at the bottom is going to be the data for the user. So going through the fields here, first few are fairly self-explanatory. Your first and last name, this will be how the user appears on the phone. So in this case, the phone would show Thomas Lyons. The directory in the system would also show Thomas Lyons. You also have the ability to change the extension number here. So as you can see, the extension for this user is 45001. And if there's anything that is pointing at this extension, if you click on Show References, it will pop up a box that'll actually tell you what is pointing at the user. So you can see here, for example, I'm not only using this user as a user, but it's also a backup extension for a hunt group, and it's also a forwarding destination for certain groups. This is kind of nice if you have to do any cleanup, because the system won't let you delete users that are being used for other features in the system. It will actually pop up warnings. And by using that show references, you can see exactly what the user is being used for. So you can go change those entries, and then you can modify the user as you need to. Under here, you have your email address, which right now, because we have a lab environment, I don't actually have an email domain. So I'm just using the client username here. But this is where you would put in the email address that you would use for correspondence through the system. This is going to be specific to features like voicemail email notifications. This will allow the system to send those through. And then under here is your client username. The client username is what is used to log into the Connect client in the system. And also, if you're a system administrator, you would be able to use this to log into Director yourself. So this is the username that you would use to log into the system, and that's going to go with your client password, which will be down closer to the bottom. Other options in this top field, you have the option to include the user in the system system dial by name directory, rather. The dial by name directory is going to allow people that call in to hit a series of numbers corresponding to the letters that are with each number to find people in the system so that they can transfer to them. So if you are building a user, for example, an executive that shouldn't be getting every call where people are trying to find them, you can remove them from the dial by name directory, and then people wouldn't be able to find them using that feature. By default, it is checked. And then under that is your make extension private box. This goes a little bit further. This will actually remove the user from the internal directory, so people internal to the company wouldn't be able to search for the user, and also blocks outbound caller ID. So the only way to get in touch with the user if the extension is made private is if they actually already know the extension number, and then you could dial it directly by the extension, or by dialing the DID directly associated with the user. However, the user will not show up in the internal system directory unless you're logged into directory as an administrator. Under here is your DID settings field. In my lab environment, I don't have any DIDs directly available to assign, but to go over how this works, this is your direct inward dial, or your direct number that you can assign to a user. And this does work for groups as well. So this field is going to be fairly common in the system. With this, what you would see is if you had a range of numbers, so for example, if we had the range 503, 555, 2000 through 503, 555, 2999, so a block of 1,000 numbers there, you would select that range in the dropdown, which would have all the ranges built into the system. And then you would be able to enter the specific number. So if you wanted this particular user to have the number of 503, 555, 2050, you would just change that number in the DID number field. So very simple to do. All you do is click up in that enable DID box, select the range, select the number. If you need to remove the DID from the user, you just uncheck the enable DID box. And if you need to change it, you just change it to whatever you need. And that will give you the setting that you need, provided that you have the number built into the system and the number is actually one that your company owns. PSTN failover is a failover option in the system if there's some sort of connectivity issue that's stopping your users from being able to contact one another. So an example of this would be site-to-site connectivity. If there is a link down from your headquarters site to one of your branches, for example, and those switches can't communicate, the system will have routes built into the system to talk to that managing switch on the far side. And if it can't get to it, if you have PSTN failover turned on, you can actually have the system instead try an external number. So you can have it set for a particular external number. Let me show you that here. So when I click on that, you'll see another box popped up, and I could type in something like a cell phone number there. So it would then instead try to use the trunks to dial out to a cell phone. Or you can have it go out to the user's DID if the user does have a DID available on them. If you do set this to DID and the user doesn't have a DID, PSTN failover won't do anything for you. But the option is there. So a nice thing to do would be to type in a cell phone number for somebody that you definitely need to be able to get the call through to if there is an issue. So that option is there. And then under here is your caller ID. As you can see next to caller ID, they've done a really good job in Connect versus 14 of putting in tooltips to tell you exactly what each function does. You'll see that it says overwrite DID. And what this means is if you have a DID on a user and they call outbound and this box is blank, you will outpulse the caller ID of the DID. So the direct number will show. If you're in an environment where, for example, you want to outpulse the main company number no matter who's calling out, you can use this caller ID field with the parameters in the example here for formatting to force that number out. So if I wanted to send out, for example, a 503, 555, 1212, I could put that in this box here, and then whenever Thomas Lai is called out to a external source using a trunk, then that call is going to show the caller ID that I put into this box. And to show you, oh, that's because I have this. There we go. It'll automatically format to the canonical format that the system needs. So if you just do a +1 and then the full number, it will put in what you need. Now, one thing that you should keep in mind for this is if you try to use a number that you don't actually own and you're on a dial tone such as a PRI, depending on the carrier, they may reject the call based on caller ID to prevent spoofing. This does vary from carrier to carrier, so the only true way to know is to try this and test it and see if the call doesn't work. And if you're running into issues with users that are configured in such a way that aren't able to make outbound calls, you might try changing this field because it's often one of the reasons that users are having problems like that. Under here, we have our license type and our access license. License type is going to be exactly what it was in 14.2. So to show you here, you can have a user set up as extension and mailbox, extension only, or mailbox only. Extension and mailbox means that you can have a phone and they can receive calls, and you can also receive voicemail. Extension only has the phone, but it does not have a voicemail box. And then mailbox only is just a voicemail. So there's no phone associated with the extension. It is basically just a voicemail box, goes directly to voicemail. And then you can log into that voicemail account and listen to messages. And that's how that one works. Access license has changed a little bit. So if you were familiar with 14.2 and the licensing there, you would be familiar with how the personal, professional, and the workgroup licenses and the operator licenses worked, and also that the personal license would allow you to sign into the communicator client, as would all the others, with the other licenses giving you advanced functionality. So a little bit different in Connect. As you can see here, there's a phone-only license and also a Connect client license. Phone only is the equivalent of the personal license in Connect. So they have made a couple changes there. And the Connect client license is the entry-level license that will allow you to log into the client. Now, if you are moving from 14 to Connect, Mitel has been providing upgrades to those existing customers so that they will get the Connect client licenses for their personal license users so they don't lose functionality. And these are also sold in bundles. So if you have any questions about that, I would recommend hitting your AE that works with your company, and they would be able to get you all the information you need for those packages. Under here, we also have our user group, our site, our language, and also our primary phone port, which is going to be the phone that is going to be used for the user. The user group is just a drop-down that will let you specify the user group and permissions you want the user to have. We'll be going over those permissions here in about the next 20-25 minutes here. And that is going to be a series of different things that you can change for the user. So we'll go over that here shortly. Your site tab will actually automatically change based on where the user is associated. In this lab environment, we only have the single site, so we have a single headquarters site. For larger environments, you would often see sites broken out into cities and where the branch offices are. And in order to change the site, you would change the drop-down to reflect the site that you want the user to be at which point the IP phones that are available in the primary phone port, which I'm about to show you, will change so that you have the ability to actually assign to that phone. There's a language tab here as well. There are language packs available for the Connect system that will allow you to change the internal system prompts to a specific language. So if you have offices in other countries where English is not the language that they normally speak, those are available. However, in the base system, the Connect system only has English installed by default. So you'll typically only see English in this language box dropdown. And then finally, we have the primary phone port. This is going to be where the user is actually set up. So if I go ahead and I click on this change settings box here, this is going to look really similar to what you would see in 14 if you're familiar with that. So we have a drop down for IP phones. That's going to be any IP phones in your environment. You can also assign them to a port, which would be a physical analog port on one of the ShoreGear or ShoreTel switches. Or you can also assign them to the soft switch. So in this particular case, you can see that I actually have a phone of 7F68DF109B56, which is the MAC address, assigned to the user, which is actually going to be the MAC address of my computer because I'm using softphone. If there were other phones directly available, you would see them in this dropdown. There's also the ability to change this to any IP phone, which would allow the user to just log into whatever phone they choose, assuming that you have hot desking turned on. The other piece that goes hand in hand with that is your current port, which is right below it. And you'll see that there's a different MAC address here. This means that I'm actually logged into a different device than my home device. And in this particular case, that's my desk phone right next to me that I have currently assigned. Next to this is a button that says Go Primary Phone. If I click on Go Primary Phone, then what the system is going to do is force me, this user, back to my primary phone port and log me off of the current port. So if I click this, it would actually switch me back to my soft phone and off of the phone that I have myself assigned to. Users can also do this from their Connect client. If they have soft phone, they would just reselect soft phone, or they would reassign themselves to their phone. There's also an on assign button on any phones that they assign themselves to in this manner. So they would just be able to press that, and it will actually take their extension off the phone and put it back on their primary phone. Under that, you have your jack number. This is an informational field only, and what this can be used for is things like if you want to know what port on the patch panel a particular phone is currently attached to. This is a nice way to do it. That way, if you run into an issue where a user has issues with their phone, phone's not powering on, phone's not getting an address, and it could be a physical problem, you can use this field, look at it, say, oh, they're in port 22 on this switch. And you can go take a look at the physical connection and work on it from there, or even look at the port configuration. So it's a nice, easy way to make your troubleshooting a little bit faster. And then under that, you also have your mailbox server. This is going to be the server that houses the voicemails of the user if they do have a voicemail box. And you can select from any of the servers in the environment. As you can see here, I actually have two servers. I have the headquarters server, and then I also have a DVS that I have built into the system currently. If I wanted to change the user to use the DVS instead of the headquarters server, I would just change that in the dropdown and hit save. Keep in mind, if you do this, as well as if you change multiple users and groups at the same time from one server to another for voicemail, the system uses SMTP to migrate those voicemail files from one server to the other. So you want to make sure you give those servers time to work. You don't want to reboot the server that you're moving people off of or the server that you're moving people to for at least a little while during this process. Otherwise, what can happen is you will lose voicemails. So that's very important to note. Under that is all your password information. So you can see we've got our client password here. Client password is going to be what you use to log into the Connect system, or if you're an administrator, what you use to log into Director as well. So it's used for both of those. And you'll see that there are two fields. You can change your password in the top field. You want to confirm it in the bottom, otherwise it won't let you save. And then there's also a box for the client password, which will force the user to change their password on the next login. So you can force that for the user, or you can just make a permanent change. And then under that is the SIP phone password. This is going to be mostly for third-party devices. So things like if you're called a mobility client, use this. Also, there are going to be certain SIP devices that are not made by Mitel but are supported using SIP proxy that may use this field. And we recommend changing this to something very easy to remember, like password or 1234556. So it's nice and easy to type into the system and into the device to make sure that you can get everything up and running. One thing to note is, although it looks like there is a default password in this field, because it is asterisked out, there actually isn't. So if you need to use the SIP password for anything, like a device like that, you want to make sure you enter one. There is no default value. That being said, unless you're going to use one of those devices like I mentioned, the SIP password doesn't come into play otherwise. And it looks like there are a few questions, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to those, and then we'll go through to the next section. All right, so the first question here that I see. Is this recorded? Looks like Heidi grabbed that for us. But yes, this will be recorded and a copy will be getting sent out. That is correct. Next question, is this going to replace the Shoreware Director? So I'm assuming that question means that you are currently either on version 14 or an earlier version of the Shoreware Director currently. When you move to Connect, which is something that we would recommend you do before the end of the year, if at all possible, because 14 will be on end-of-life support as of December 31st of this year. This is what you would see. You would see the new Connect director here. This, for all intents and purposes, has everything that the old director does. It's just in a different format. So that's why we're doing this training today, to make sure that people can see and become acquainted with the new interface. Why do I not have the Show References button? I would have to take a look at your specific setup. So if you aren't seeing that, what I would recommend is submitting a ticket to our support at support@inflowcommunications.com. They would be able to take a look at it for you. The Show References button was a fairly recent addition, so it could be that we just need to upgrade your version of Connect. The current screen shown for the user is for a non-AD user, or are you not showing the AD settings? So that is correct. This is not an Active Directory user, and the environment that I'm currently in wouldn't support an Active Directory environment, so I don't have a way to show that currently. However, we may show that in another training. Does the DID section still maintain existing ranges with dropdown? So if I'm understanding that question correctly, will it show all the ranges that you already have pre-built? Yes. If you do have ranges pre-built into the system, all of those ranges will become available. Is there a way to test the PS10 failover without an actual failure? Not really, because the system is going to see that the link is up between the managing switches and establish the connection that way. So you would almost have to force a failover for that situation. Let's see. Will we be shown the new Connect client? Not during these admin trainings, but we will be seeing that as we do more user trainings in the future. We also do have some videos of the Connect client up on our YouTube channel and on our website.
Yeah, Tom, I will add in for Dennis, I will send you the link to our Connect client webinar so you can have that available to you. But as Tom mentioned, we do have many webinars recorded out on our YouTube channel. So definitely know that that is another resource for everyone.
Thanks, Heidi. Jack number is also where we place the room number for the ShoreTel 911 notification email or text number. And yes, that is correct. The Jack number is also used for a couple of the advanced applications. So if you're using something like the emergency application notification, which is a popular item for many of the school districts around here, you would use the Jack number for that as well. So that's important. Is there a training for the change from ShoreTel to Mitel? We have ShoreTel phone hardware. So the good news is the current hardware that you have, with a few possible exceptions if you have very old hardware, will work with the Mitel Connect director. So they can use the 400 series phones, the existing ShoreGear switches. Those do work. There are some caveats to that. So what I would recommend, if you're worried about that, is submit a ticket to us. Let us take a look at your system, and we can verify if there's anything that would need to change. But the good news is, from a user standpoint for their phones and from a hardware perspective, unless you're on really old hardware, you should be totally fine.
And I will add also, we do have Connect readiness webinars. On occasion, I'm looking to see when the next one is, but know that if you're just wanting to learn more about the switch between 14.2 to Connect, we do have webinars on that also.
Perfect. And then the next question, we've recently upgraded to Mitel. Since then, we've had some random reports of users not having the worker voicemails refresh. I would, again, submit a ticket to our support help desk. Let us take a look. There have been a few builds that I know of that have been affected by a bug that could be what you're experiencing. And also in some of the older builds, there was just some general issues with work group voicemails. We can definitely take a look at it and get you on the right path. Let our support team know, and we'll be able to take a look at it for you. Let's see. When you have time, can you send me a link to sign up for tomorrow's webinar? Yep, we should have an email already sent out for that, and I'm sure we can resend it. And is there a way to change the system-wide default VM password from 1234 to something more non-trivial? So that's actually a great question. So if we go to, let's see, I'm trying to remember if there is a thing specifically for that in here. I may have to come back to that at the end, but I will keep that on the list here. I want to go ahead and get through a couple more of these sections, but I will come back to that one. So to go through the next options here, as you can see on my screen, there are a number of tabs. And this kind of takes over the 4 tabs in 14.2 where you had your personal options and all of those features. So I'm going to go into telephony now. And you're going to see a lot of things that are going to look really familiar if you've used 14.2. And these are all, for the most part, options that the users can change on their own. But just to go through each one here real quick, you have your call stack depth. That's how many calls a user can take simultaneously before the system decides they are too busy to take another call and start sending calls to voicemail. It does default to 8. You can change this to whatever number you would like. You can also make a default maximum for a user group size. So anybody in a particular user group could only take up to 5 calls, for example, if you really wanted to. So you do have that option. Ring type and wallpaper, these are both changeable on the phone or in the client. You can change the ringtone on the device. You can also change the wallpaper if you have a phone that supports it with the color screen. So you do have those options here. Automatic off-hook preference. This is going to be what the system does if you just answer a call on the client, or if you hit the name or number field in the client, make a call, or just dial out. By default, the system is going to send everything to the speakerphone on the device that you have assigned. If you are using a headset, you would want to either select headset or wireless headset. And the difference between these two is headset assumes that you have a wired headset that's always on. Wireless headset's going to allow you to set up the phone so that you can actually use the button on the side of your headset to pick up and hang up calls. So you can answer calls a lot easier in that regard. To kind of go hand in hand with the headset options, there's also an option that says enable hands-free mode. Hands-free mode is going to allow you to keep your headset on without the dial tone going through your ear continuously. So if you have a wired headset and you want it on all the time, you just want it available, you can set that up so that you're not going to hear the dial tone the entire time until you start typing in a number, at which point the dial tone comes up. This is something that a user can turn on by themselves. And it is important to note that this field is there because we do every once in a while get support tickets where users are saying their phone has stopped working, when in reality their phone is in hands-free mode, so they're not hearing a dial tone until they hit a button, so they think that there's something wrong. So that's an important one. And then call waiting tone, that's going to be the beep that you hear when another call comes in when you're on the phone. It's on by default. You can turn it off if the user needs it. And also, if you're setting up something like a fax extension, you would want to make sure that the call waiting tone is turned off because fax machines do not play nicely with call waiting. Under here is a couple different options for kind of a client access for trunks for dialing out. You can change your trunk access code. Most people use 9 as a general rule. If you have multiple trunks in the system and you're using a different digit for trunk access for some of those trunks, you can change this to kind of force a default trunk setting for client dialing, assuming that those trunks can make the calls that the client is trying to make. Otherwise, the client will move to another trunk and use the other trunk access code. And then mailbox for recorded calls. If you're using call recording in the system on a personal level, if this is blank, the user's voice mailbox would be where the call goes. If not, if you do have something in here, so if I had 45002, for example, and hit save so I can show you, that would mean that Charles Grant would get all of my voicemails or all of my recording voicemails as they went through. So you do have that that option as well. Most people do keep this blank, so it would just go to the user's voicemail box. This does not affect things like call recording applications that are being used for multiple users. Headset quality. If you're using a decked headset, you can use wideband or narrowband. And you can also change the power mode if needed for the headset as well. And then under here is a bunch of different options. So you've got your fax support. By default, it's going to have a user redirect option. If you have a device like a fax server built in your system, you can use this and then change the sites tab to reflect that fax user. And if a fax tone comes into the user, it'll actually redirect to the fax server that you have built in the system. But other options you have here is a user no redirect, meaning they get the call, they get the fax call. Fax server and fax machine. So if there is an analog device like a fax machine or a fax server set up on this extension, you can change that. And then if you have any of the more old school devices like a data terminal for somebody to remote in, or a fax server that doesn't support T38, which is a store and forward protocol to make IP-based faxing a little bit easier to handle, you can change that as well. Typically, if you're running some sort of modem, you're going to want to use non-T38 data terminal. That will allow those devices to talk the way that they need to. And then under here, you've got a whole bunch of different options. So to go through those real quick, you can enable video calls, and you can do either standard or high definition. That's for one-to-one video calls in the Connect client. You can enable telephony presence. This will allow you to see if users are on the phone, available, or in do not disturb state, in addition to being able to just see them in the Connect client. This is on by default. Shared call appearances. This is for use with bridge call appearances, and this is going to be something that we'll cover tomorrow during tomorrow's training. So we'll come back to this one. Soft phone. This lets you use the soft phone that is a part of the Connect client to make calls, as opposed to using the a desk phone or another device. Phone API. That's kind of for custom programming. Most people don't use this, but there is an option there if there's a custom app that we're trying to use. And then remote phone authentication. This is more of an advanced feature. Some of you that are in here may have a Connect system utilizing the Edge gateway. The remote phone authentication allows a phone to assign to a user that has this checked. So if you try to get a phone through the Edge gateway and bring it up on the system and then try to assign it to a user, they must have this box checked. Otherwise, the system will not allow you to do it. And this is a licensed feature. So when you turn this on, it does take up one remote phone license for each box that's checked here. Enhanced mobility. If you're using mobility, you would use this. And this would allow you to set up the extension that you're going to use with mobility and also type in the mobile phone number of the user. We will not be going over mobility as a part of the 2-day training. That may be covered in a later admin training. And then delayed ring down is a special option that forces the phone or device of the user to call a specific number when the device is brought off hook. So if I wanted to call John Bernard, is when my phone is picked up, I can put his extension in here, and then in ring down delay, I can have it wait as long as I want it to before that call goes. Typically, that's going to be set to 0 seconds, and this is going to be used for something like a door buzzer for the outside. Like a good example would be, we have a customer that has a library with a door buzzer that you can use to get in and out with a speaker on it, and we have it set up so that when the button on the speaker is pressed, it automatically calls a hunt group inside, and when they pick up the call, they're able to talk back and forth, and then the user inside can decide if they want to open the door for them. So that's a pretty common option for stuff like that. And let's see, it looks like we have a few more questions, so I'm going to hit those really quickly here. How would you recommend a user eliminating spam calls from a number that continuously changes but have the same area code and prefix? Really, unfortunately, there's not a great way to do that if the number is continuously changing, because all of the spam blocking features that can really be done either at the carrier or on the Mitel level are going to require the direct number. Spoofing in this day and age is really hard to combat. That being said, there is an option on the Mitel side called the nuisance call handler that isn't going to give you exactly what you want, but is going to make it a little bit easier to work with that. And can also work with your auto attendants and groups, not just individual users, to block those calls. So if you have any questions about that, I would recommend messaging your account executive or sending in a support ticket so we can give you some more options about that feature. It is an advanced application with Mitel. Let's see. We are using ShoreTel hardware. The ringing wallpapers don't seem to push to the phone. Is this a compatibility issue? It could be, because some phones do not have the wallpaper options that the other ones do. There are phones that don't have a color screen or just don't have wallpaper options at all. The 485G and the IP655 would be examples of phones that can do wallpapers. If you're having issues with that, again, let our support know and we can take a look at it for you. It could be something to do with the formatting if you're trying to use custom wallpapers, but the defaults should definitely work for those. Let's see. T38 now or T37, which is the preferred for the multi-tech units that you sell? I can't speak to multi-tech, but for the ShoreTel system, they do use T38 for faxing. We do not do T37. Is there a way that we can do this through the admin panel? I am not sure. It looks like this might be part of the spam calls question, and it would be a separate application. So that would be something that we would need to show you, and that would be best done offline here. Does the fax support have its own desktop client? No, fax support is just telling the system what to do if it gets a fax tone destined for a specific extension. So if you have a fax machine plugged into an analog port, for example, and you have that assigned to a user extension, which is a common setup, you would just make sure that the fax support is set to fax machine, and that will tell the system to send the fax signal directly to the device and not to send it elsewhere or to block it out. How do I have someone press a button on the phone to page or talk on the speakerphone to all other people in the same building? That's going to be using a paging group, which we will go over tomorrow, but that is something that you can set up in the system. Is nuisance call handler still on the server or integrated into Mitel Connect directory? It would be on the server once installed, but it is an additional application that would need to be installed on the system. All right, and it looks like that's all the questions for now. So real quick, I'm going to go over the voicemail and the routing, and then we're going to go into user groups for the last few minutes of today's webinar to make sure that we can hit that as well. So going over voicemail is real simple. So just to show you guys here, just like the client and SIP passwords, you do have the voicemail password here. Default is 1234, as we mentioned. You can change this to whatever you would like, anywhere from 4 to 26 characters if you really want to do that. And you can also force the change on next login, just like you can for the client password, which we recommend if you have to reset a user's voicemail for sure. That way they can keep that secure. Accept broadcast messages. There are system distribution lists in the Mitel system that will allow people to send voicemails to multiple targets all at the same time. These are considered broadcast messages. And if you have this box checked, then if those are sent out, your extension will accept the voicemail and you'll be able to hear it. If it's unchecked, you won't get it. By default, it's checked. It's not an often used feature in the system, but it is something that's there if you want to exclude somebody like a CEO from a company-wide voicemail for whatever reason. You could do that here if you would like to. Play envelope information when listening to messages. That is your old school voicemail. So if you recall, you used to be able to call into a voicemail. You could hear exactly who sent you the message, how long it was, when it was sent, what they ate for lunch, pretty much everything you could think of hearing before the message actually played. By default, all that extra information is off when you dial into the voicemail login in the system. But if you want all of that information, you can check this box, and it is a per user setup for that. Email delivery options. This is going to allow you to send email notifications for voicemails to the user. And you have 3 different options. The default is disabled, so it won't send anything. You can also, they actually added another option, the new version. You can send an email with text only. So you're going to get an email that says you got a voicemail from this number. It was 35 seconds. You can also attach the WAV file. So it will actually attach a copy of the voicemail to the same email. So you'll see you got a voicemail from this person for 35 seconds. You also have the WAV file right there, so you can listen to it from a computer or a mobile phone. And then you can also email the voicemail as a link, which will allow you to listen to that. And in my experience, this is brand new. So most of you probably won't see the voicemail as link, but it will give you a link that you can click on, and it'll give you a little web player that you can listen to the voicemail from. Under that, the last piece of voicemail is automatic message forwarding. So let's say you have a user that's going to be going on sabbatical for 6 weeks, and we need to make sure that all their voicemails are actually covered, but we don't want to be logging into their direct voicemail box. The way to do this would be to either specify the mailbox, or actually, yes, it would be to specify the mailbox. And if I type in, oops, if I can type here, there we go. So if I wanted to send all of Thomas Lyons's voicemails to Frank Saunders, I can put this, put his extension in there. And then the way that this works is, by default, the voicemail will be left on my extension. They will get my greeting. And when the voicemail is finished and the person that called hangs up, a copy of that would get sent to Frank. So I would retain the original, and a copy would be sent to Frank. If you don't want it to work like that, and you would rather have it just directly go to Frank and not have Thomas come back to 400 voicemails after 6 weeks, you can select this delete message after forwarding down here. And what that will do is it'll make a copy, send it to Frank, and then it will delete the voicemail that was brought in from the original mailbox. So that's an important note there. And then to turn that off again, when Thomas comes back in the office, you just click on none. Routing, just to go over this really fast here. This is your additional phones area. And you might have noticed that it looks kind of similar to things like external assignment in 14.2 just by the activation tab here. So you have that except by answering accept call by pressing 1. And the way this works is you've got a label on the left side, so I'll just type in Tom Cell, put in a number, and yes, that is not my cell. And then your activation, accept call by answering or accept call by pressing 1, and then the number of rings. A couple of important pieces for this. It typically takes about 2 rings from the PBX until it can actually forward back out to a cell phone because of the way that the system has to trombone a call. So you would need to adjust the amount of rings to account for this. So the default, as you can see here, is 3. We recommend setting this to at least 6 to give the cell phone at least 4 rings to try to answer the call. At 3, they will get half to 1 ring, and then if they don't get it, it's going to go to either their Mitel voicemail, or if you're set to accept by answering, their cell phone voicemail, which is the real difference here as well. If you have it set to accept by answer, when you pick up your cell phone or your other device, it will immediately answer the call. The issue with this is that if your cell phone voicemail picks up, that will also pick up the call. So by forcing to accept the call by pressing 1, that'll make sure that the call stays in the Mitel system and goes to the Mitel voicemail box if they don't pick up the call. So best practice is to keep this set to accept call by pressing 1. Ring Me, which is a sub option under routing, lets you change your additional phones. So you can change where your incoming calls ring if you have a secondary phone here. So for example, let me go ahead and save this here. Go back to routing and Ring Me. Oh, you know what? That's because of my user group settings. But if I had external assignment available on the user group, which we will show here, it looks like probably at the beginning of tomorrow at this point, we would be able to change the dropdown to that cell phone that I put in there and have calls go directly to my cell phone as opposed to my desk phone. Additional phones will allow you to ring multiple phones at the same time. And you can do it based on your availability state. So you can see right now I actually have available, in a meeting, and out of office selected. Vacation and custom are not checked. So if this user was in one of those modes, no additional phones would ring. But down here under ring delay, you can change how long the system should wait and how many times the primary extension should ring before the secondary devices should ring as well. Usually this is set to none just so they all ring as quickly as possible. And also keep in mind, like what I mentioned about the cell phones, it takes about two rings for it to go through and back out through the PSTN to get to the cell phone. So even though there's a ring delay of none, you're still talking about a 2-ring delay. So that's important to note. And then under that, you can choose what to simultaneously ring. So in this particular case, I would simultaneously ring my cell phone. If there was a second option under the phones tab, you could actually set up multiple options there as well. Limitations for this, you cannot use 2 ShoreTel extensions for this. It does have to be an external device in order for you to be able to simultaneously ring it. So that's important. And then Find Me works much the same way. There's an option when callers reach your voicemail to press a button to get to Find Me, and you would change the options here. It works much the same way as additional phones. It would just try to reach you on a different number if that option is hit once the user is in your voicemail box. And it's the same thing. You would choose whatever phones you want that to try to ring. And then for a couple additional options, there's a send incoming caller ID. So the external device would see the original caller if that box is checked. If it's unchecked, they would just see the company number. And an important piece for that, like I mentioned with the users, if the caller ID is for some reason not on the trunk that you're trying to dial out of, depending on the carrier, they may block the call. So if you're trying to use Find Me and you're having issues with the Find Me working and that box is checked, I would try on checking that to see if anything changes. And if it does, the next step would be we would want to talk with your carrier and see if there's a configuration we can get set up to support the original caller ID for you. And then under that, you can also enable the recording of the caller's name for Find Me. That's if you get a call that doesn't have a caller ID on it. They'll actually get a system prompt asking them to record their name and press pound, and then you'll hear that before you answer the call. You can even force that even if caller ID is present. So even if there's a valid caller ID that gets sent through, you would be able to force that recording. And then finally, you can enable Find Me for incoming calls before playing greeting. The difference between this and simultaneous ring is if you have automatic Find Me turned on, you would actually have the call ring all the way through to voicemail on the primary device without trying to reach any external devices. And then once you hit voicemail, instead of going directly to the voicemail greeting, it will then tell the caller that it is trying to find the user for you, at which point the additional phones that you have set up for Find Me will ring. And then finally, if those additional phones don't get picked up either, you go right back to the ShoreTel voicemail box and you're good to go. Availability states, just to touch on this real fast, this is where you can change how the user handles calls. As a general rule, if your user has a voicemail box, their standard call forward condition for their available mode will be no answer or busy, and after the no answer number of rings, it will forward to their voicemail. If your user does not have a voicemail box, the call forward condition will be never. And as you can see, all the forwarding options are grayed out. This will ring the phone until either the user picks up or the person that called them hangs up. So there is no gray area there. It just keeps ringing and ringing. And then you can also, if you wanted to, change this to always, so you can always forward it somewhere. The default destination for that is going to be voicemail, so directly to voicemail. And this is also what you would see if a user is set up as mailbox only. These are all customizable in the Connect client using the routing rules that are in the settings there, but they can also be changed on this side. And there is a user group setting that does disable the ability for users to change their availability state so that there is an option to lock this down. One other option that is on each of these is this caller presses 0. This is what was the personal assistant option in the 14.2 system. And if you specify an extension here, then when the caller presses 0 when they're in your voicemail box, they will go to that destination. And then you also have the message notification, which is going to let the user know when they get voicemails. And then also, do not record voice messages, only play greeting. This used to be called voicemail greeting only mode in 14.2 and generated a number of tickets because users could check this on their client. And then what would happen is when people got to their voicemail, it would play their greeting, but then it would tell them that no messages could be taken. It would hang up on the caller. So if you have anybody that tells you that they're having an issue with people not being able to leave them voicemails, I would check this box to make sure it's not turned on, because it's a common factor for that. You can also change schedules on the individual user. It's not necessarily recommended. We recommend doing this at the group and auto attendant levels to make it a little bit easier. But you can do it for individual users if you want. And you can also turn on escalation profiles, which was a topic that we went over in one of our trainings about a month ago. So we also do have a video available for those. Those won't be touched on during the admin training today or tomorrow, but we do have that available if you're looking for that. That's kind of an escalation template you can use for your users or groups, so that if somebody misses a call, it can get escalated to a group of people or to the right people like management, so that it gets resolved as quickly as possible. Let's see, and right now it looks like it's 10:56 already, so we'll get into user groups tomorrow and go over those. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the questions and make sure that we can hit those questions. So let me go ahead and grab that here. Let's see. Will there be a voicemail to text option? So my understanding of this is there is an application called Scribe that Mitel has been working on. I haven't actually seen it in production yet, so I haven't seen how valid the transcription is, how it works. However, it was something that they were working on, and I can work on getting some more information on that for the beginning of tomorrow's training. But we can look into that for you. Let's see. Hello, I have enabled the WAV file email delivery option, but I can only hear the voicemail in Outlook on my computer. When I try to hear my voicemail in the email on the cell phone, I don't have the attachment. Is there a way to hear the voicemail in the email app on cell phones? So what you should be getting in your email would be a regular email with an attachment on it. But there's also a ShoreTel integration with Outlook that would allow you to play directly from Outlook, and it would be a video cassette icon that you would get instead of a regular email. If that is what you're using, then that wouldn't move over to the phone, because that's only going to be in your Outlook desktop app. We'd want to take a look and see what your settings are and what you're receiving. So that would be something that would, again, be good to look at and work through with support, so we can get on a screen share and take a look at the settings for you. I was told that mobility is now included as part of the user licenses. Is this true? If so, is the mobility router still required and the licensing of the router required? So the multi-part question with a few answers here for you. So on the Connect side, they do include the mobility pieces for you as a part of your bundled licenses. So that does come with it. The mobility router is still required. However, my understanding is the license that you needed to actually turn on the features for the mobility router is no longer required, which is something that was required in 14.2. Otherwise, all of your users would become operationally disabled. So it's kind of a yes and no. You still do need the hardware or the virtual hardware. We do highly recommend virtual for those. But the licensing does come with the bundles for the users now. Do you have any guidance around forwarding work group or even contact center call queues or queue calls to an external phone? There's a couple different ways to do it. It's not going to be covered directly in this training, at least on the contact center side, because that's going to require a few more options to get that working the way that you want. We will show you regular work group though tomorrow and how to forward. And you can actually do it directly from the work group using the external number. So you can do everything that you're looking for there. For contact center, I would recommend submitting a support ticket, and we can get you that option. Is SMS coming to MiVoice Connect? From my understanding and from what I've heard, I haven't heard anything about it. That doesn't mean that it's not, but I haven't heard anything officially published. See. Have a user not turn down a ringer. I'm not sure exactly what we're looking for there. If we're looking for a way to stop a user from turning down their volume on their phone? Unfortunately, there is no way to disable that. If they have the phone, they can change the volume on it. Looks like we have a confirmation that Scribe works great. Thank you, Keith, for that. I just haven't seen it personally, but it has been in the works for quite a while, so I'm assuming that they worked a lot of the kinks out with that already, so that's perfect. And the last question, I don't know if this is going to be a mass email for the recording for today, but if not, I'd also like to get a copy. We will definitely have the webinar available for you. It may take a couple days to get that processed, but when we get it done, we will make sure that we get all of that information out to you guys. All right, so that's gonna go ahead and wrap up the webinar for today. So thank you for going through part 1 of our administrator training with us. Tomorrow we will be starting with user groups and going over those, as that's gonna be really the primary functions that you'll use as a system administrator. And then we are gonna go over the groups, and if we have time, we'll go over trunking, and we will go over diagnostics and monitoring as well. So quite a few more topics that we will be looking at. And some last minute information for you before we get off the call here today. Want to make sure that everybody here knows how to connect with us if you do have any questions or want to go over anything, have any issues whatsoever. So to give you our customer resources, you can email us at support@inflowcommunications.com. We also have a support portal where if you register, you can actually see all of your open tickets, their statuses, and also reply from there at support.inflowcommunications.com. And we also have a phone number at 855-946-3569. We do have a 3-ring answer policy. You're not going to be on hold for 10 or 15 minutes trying to get a hold of us. And when you do get somebody, you're going to get somebody who is very in tune with the Director platform and will be able to assist you with whatever you need. And then finally, if you want any more information on the Inflow support packages, you can send us an email at sales@inflowcommunications.com. And you can also give us a call at 844-446-3569. And so with that, thank you very much for joining us today. Again, my name is Tom, and on behalf of everybody here at Inflow, thank you very much for taking the time to join our webinar today. And we certainly hope we will see you tomorrow as well. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.